A little reminder, their recordings are uploaded to YouTube afterwards, so if you want to watch it, if you want to send it to people, it's up there. The Dira channel, you can find it. It's there. Just before we start, I do want to say we have coming up this Thursday an evening a talk with Johnny Daniels. He is a very interesting guy. He started a nonprofit for Holocaust memory and very active in Poland, restoring graves. He's very active now in Israel. He was a advisor. He was a chief of staff to some Knesset members. He's been talking on Thursday night about Holocaust, Israel, and anti-Semitism, and Jewish identity today. So that's going to be at someone's home here in the neighborhood Thursday night. It's online, so please, if you can join us then, make reservations. And then next Friday night, February 7th, is our first Friday at Community Shabbat. And this month's going to be at Bison and Bourbon at the restaurant in Gowanus. So it's also very exciting. If you can join us, it'd be nice. Looking forward. This week is Parsha Bo, with third Parsha of and this is the actual Exodus. We have the going out of Egypt here. So we're finally, after 2 weeks of suffering through exile, through slavery, we're being liberated, we're being free. So just to go through the Parsha, and then we'll zoom in on one particular detail, which actually could even almost be looked over. So we have the last three plagues. And we spoke about the plagues last week at length, the structure and format and the pattern of the plagues, and also the point of them. The last three appear in the Parsha here is the locusts, darkness, and death of the firstborns. And we have this, dialogue with Moses and Pharaoh, God, very interesting, where, Pharaoh, okay, I agree, you can all go beside your animals. And Moses says, absolutely not. Taking animals, and even you'll give us animals. And Pharaoh said, forget about it. And it's almost like, screaming for a ceasefire, and then actually, you know what, we don't want to give any hostages away, right? It's like, this is the mentality. Pharaoh is playing a victim, but then refuses to give in, and acknowledges how powerful God is and where this is going to lead him, but still doesn't want to give away ground. Eventually, God tells Moses, enough's enough. I'm going to do a last plague, which is going to finish everything off, the death of the firstborns. Before I do that, let me tell you how this is going to play out. And he tells Moses, today is the new month, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, beginning of the month. In 10 days' time, I want the Jewish people to take a sheep or a lamb and to tie it to a bed, have it for 4 days to attract attention. And this was one of the deities of the Egyptians. So this was a big deal, a big sort of vocal protest against the Egyptians. And during these 4 days, sit tight. After 4 days, the 14th, you will have slaughter the lamb, enjoy it with matzah and maror that evening, what we call today a Seder. That night's going to be the death of the firstborns, and the Jewish people are going to go free. In the meantime, he said, I want you also to go borrow, quote unquote, all the expensive items from the neighbors. So all the Egyptian jewelry, their silverware, whatever you can get your hands on, take it, because it's going to be yours. Actually, way later in history, the Talmud records this debate where they came to the rabbis, the Egyptians came, someone came representing the Egyptians. It says, you owe us billions of dollars for all this stolen goods, which the Jews took when they left Egypt. It's in your own Torah. It's clear as day that you guys stole these things from us, you thieves. So the rabbi says, sure, I will pay it all back as soon as you pass reparations for the hundreds of years of slavery. Right? That's what it was. And so it almost and God had promised Abraham hundreds of years earlier, your descendants will be slaves, but they will leave Egypt with a lot of wealth. And interestingly, God actually, when he tells Moses, tell the Jews to take all this wealth, he's begging Moses, please, I have a deal with Abraham. I don't want you guys to go free. The Jews probably weren't interested in wealth right now, right? Just get me out of here. What do I need silver for? I'm a slave for hundreds of years. Freedom, that's the biggest thing. The God says, please, I made a deal with Abraham. I need to follow through. So make sure they take these goods. And it happens. The night comes and there's a crazy tumult in Egypt. The firstborns are dying everywhere. And this was more than just one person per family, because the Midrash says the firstborn in each household. So what if someone was living away from home? The oldest child would die, the oldest in the home would die, it would oldest of different mothers, so all of them would die. So this is mass death and destruction in Egypt in that night. And Pharaoh just lost it because he's a firstborn himself and totally freaked out. It says, middle of the night, comes out to Moses and Aaron and says, go, get out of here. This is the straw that sort of broke his back. I want you guys to leave. And the Jews leave. But Etzam Yom Hazeh, they didn't want to leave at nighttime. They're not creeping out in the middle of the night. We're going in the middle of the day. Sun's shining, and we're walking out of here, marching proudly out of Egypt. It was almost like a show of confidence. We don't have to sneak out of here. We can go during the day. And also there's an idea where the sun was worshipped as a god. So it shouldn't be assumed, oh, the sun god would have saved the Egyptians, but since it was the nighttime, no, we're here in the middle of the day and we're able to leave. And the Jews leave Egypt. And this becomes obviously the national holiday of Passover, where we celebrate our freedom, the birth of the Jewish people, leaving Egypt when we became formally a nation. And then on to Sinai, where it was ratified with the Ten Commandments and giving of the Torah. But essentially, the prophet Yechezkel describes the exit as the birth. This is when we're born. This is when we become a people. And so not only do we celebrate Passover once a year, so much of our tradition is linked back to the exodus from Egypt. Every Shabbos in Mekish, we say Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim. This is in commemoration of leaving Egypt. So many mitzvahs we do are Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim. Every single day in the Shema, we have to again mention Egypt. So it becomes not just a one point in our history, but in the point, the focal point of history, where all of Judaism traces itself back to this one moment. Everything we do was born out of this exodus. And that's pretty much the overview of the Parsha. And there's a lot of details. We have the tefillin in here for the first time. The commandment to wear tefillin on our arm. Again, remembering Egypt and our head. But that's the general overview. Any questions here? Okay.
The sanctify the new moon, that's the
first
mitzvah?
Yes, that's exactly what I want to get to. You hit the nail on the head. There's a one-liner. There's a one-liner here, which if you just read the text of the story, you'd almost miss it. But it is a huge, huge one-liner. And so we're going to look at it together. It's the beginning of chapter 12, which is on page 378 and 379. So we're up to this kind of God going to do the last, in between the ninth plague and 10th plague. And here God is going to introduce to Moses the Passover rituals, right? This is what we're going to do. But the first verse, where introducing God's conversation with Moses, reads like this. We're only going to read the bold, which is the actual text of the Parsha. God said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, this renewal will signal the beginning of every new month. This month must be for you the beginning of the months. It must be for you the first of the months of the year. So basically God's telling him today is the first of the month, and then the 10th of the month, the 14th of the month, that's how this schedule of Passover is going to play out. But this almost introductory verse carries with it so much. Not least, it is the very first time we find a commandment for the Jewish people. It's the first mitzvah. We have Abraham received commands to have a circumcision. Noah received commandments. Adam received commandments. But the Jewish people never did. There's God obviously directing them, guiding them, helping them, being there for them. But as far as being a directive for the Jewish people at large, this is the first one. And the rest of the commandments come later on the way to Sinai, most of them at Sinai. But we have a commandment here. What is the nature of this commandment?
Is the commandment that the month is the beginning of the months, or is it the lamb or kid in the next sentence?
So even lamb or kid is a commandment that was for Passover. That becomes ratified later on for all Passovers. But even before that, in this introductory verse, is a commandment of its own, a mitzvah of its own for Rosh Chodesh. Right? It's a very vague text, though. What this means, what's the command, what's the mitzvah here? In fact, Rashi, the very first commentary, the very first pasuk verse in Genesis, ask the question that Torah should have started here. This is where Judaism begins. All the stories of creation of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, even slavery in Egypt, that's not Jewish history. That's pre-Jewish history. Judaism starts right here. Torah, directed for Jews, should have started with this verse. Right? I'm not getting into what he answers there. He says, all of this is just to prove that Israel belongs to the Jews. Literally, it's the whole entire Genesis. And beginning of Exodus, say God created a world, he has his people, and whoever he decides to give it to the Jewish people, Israel, that's part of the biblical narrative of history. But essentially, Rashi is telling us, this is the beginning of everything. This verse begins Judaism. Now, if I were to close the books for a second and say, hey, what do you think should be the opening mitzvah of the Jewish text? What's the beginning of Judaism? What would you suggest?
Circumcision? I don't know.
Okay, circumcision.
Probably the 7 Noahide laws.
Okay, 7 Noahide laws.
Possibly Abraham smashing the idols.
Okay. These are all good suggestions for the beginning of the first mitzvah. Look at 10 Commandments. When God presents 10 Commandments, what's the first one? Believe in God. Right? You start from the very beginning. Build the foundations. Instead, what's the first mitzvah which the Jewish people get as a nation? Rosh Chodesh. Sanctify the new moon. It's a strange opening for a relationship with God. And the other question I have is, what exactly is this mitzvah? God's kind of telling him a date. What's the directive here? And if you look in the Hebrew, it's even more confusing because the English already kind of does some sort of interpretation by translation. The Hebrew says, the month is for you, beginning ahead of the months, it's the first month of the year. It's a very, it's a word salad. The months of the year, first month. So what is the mitzvah and why isn't this most coming right now? And think about it in the terms of its context. The Jews are still stuck in Egypt, right? We're about to experience the plague of the firstborns, freedom. And in this kind of liminal moment, God says, I'm going to take the opportunity just to throw in a mitzvah here, right? Casually throw one in, only one, because the rest of the mitzvahs for the Jews come later. But I want to just throw one thing into the mix right here, right now. It's important before you go free to know this. Sanctify the new moon. Dun, dun, dun. What is this, right? So let's backtrack a little bit and think about what this mitzvah is. Sanctify the new moon. And I want to give a little bit of a technical overview of the Jewish calendar. Okay, so the calendar we're used to, the Gregorian calendar, the secular calendar we use, is a solar calendar, which means it follows the sun. The seasons and a year is a full rotation of the sun, 365 days. That's the calendar we use. In a solar calendar, there actually are no months, really, right? If you just follow the sun, nothing happens after a month. Nothing. There's a rotation of 365 days, or 365 and a half, or a quarter, which might be add a leap year every few years, right? There's a rotation of the sun, that's it. In contrast, the Jewish calendar introduced right here is a lunar calendar, which means we follow the moon.
It changes.
The moon has a monthly cycle, 29 and a half days of the monthly cycle of the moon. There are no years in a lunar calendar. It's just cycles of a month. So what happened is, when you put the two together and overlap them, so the solar, when they created the Gregorian calendar, they wanted to divide time a little more than just a year. So they saw, well, there's almost 12 rotations of the moon around the calendar. We'll break our calendar into 12.
Wow.
Now, those 12 have nothing to do with the moon because they don't match the moon cycle. But pretty much since there's 12 months, 12 lunar cycles in our solar cycle, we're going to break the solar cycle into 12 arbitrary divisions, 30 or 31 days to fit the solar cycle. The lunar cycle is actually much shorter. Each month is 29 and a half days. So over 12 months, you have 354 days. If I'm getting a little technical math here, forgive me. So we have two different cycles, and most calendars choose one over the other. So now, Gregorian calendar, we only really have, we look at the sun. Yes, the month we borrow from the lunar idea, but there's nothing in the moon connecting to those months. And so we're just following the sun, the seasons, and 365 days. That's our year. The Muslims, on the other end of the spectrum, only have a lunar calendar.
That's right.
And so their year, which they also borrowed from a solar idea, 12 lunar months, is 354 days, which means they lose 11 days every year.
Yeah.
If you do the math, around every 34 years, they're actually losing a year, right? So it's 33 years or 34 years on our calendar is 34 or 35 years on their calendar. They jump a whole year ahead.
That's true.
What it also means is the seasons, which are solar ideas, the seasons of their holidays are changing.
It's
So
like-
Ramadan every year changes 11 days. Every 3 is a month. Every 9 years is a different season, right? Ramadan, the 9th month of the Muslim calendar, which they're fasting, is going to turn out every year a different sort of time of year because they're solely sticking to a lunar calendar.
Yeah.
Judaism has a marriage of both, where we're following the lunar months, but we're also aligning ourselves, syncing with the solar calendar. The reason we do that is, the technical reason is, because all of the holidays are linked to the seasons. Right here we have Passover, we have later on in Torah, but it says about Passover, is celebrated in the spring. So having a lunar calendar, how are you maintaining Passover in the spring? It's going to keep changing. The only way to do it is to have a correction every few years, right? Which we call a leap year. We add a month every 2 to 3 years.
That answers Jared's question.
Which one?
Cause he was asking like specifically like how is it that like like how do we make it so perfect that it lands out that way? It's like, oh yeah, because we do the leap year thing, of course.
Right.
Compensate, yeah.
So actually, it didn't used to be so perfect. I'll get that in a second. Now, it was a little more messy back in the day. Now it's very, the mathematical equation has been done. And basically we have 7 leap years every 19 years, which is a perfect alignment between the solar and lunar. 7, and that's why every 19 years, we have a Jewish birthday and a secular birthday. So the birthday, you're born on a certain date on a Jewish calendar. My birthday is the 12th of ER. And on the English calendar, it's May 17th. The next year, May 17th will be somewhere else in ER. It doesn't line up exactly.
May 17th, I mean,
Oh, look at that. Look at that.
Also,
Taurus.
Taurus, that's right. All right. Soul brothers, right there. So every 19, sometime 11 years also will line up. But every 19 years will always line up because the cycle reaches a complete, every 19 years, sort of is hitting itself again.
Mm-hmm.
So the 19-year cycle in the years. So that's why you have every year Passover is in April 2nd this year, March 19th. Like it's every year is different. Yard size is going to be different each year because the Jewish calendar, always following its lunar, is going to keep changing every year and then correcting itself. And so there's fluidity in the Jewish dates versus the secular dates, right? We're following a lunar calendar and the Gregorian calendar following a solar calendar. That makes sense, right? Why do we have to be so complicated? Let's pick. Either go with a solar calendar, then the seasons matter, or we're following the moon, and then who cares if Passover is in the spring or the winter or the summer? For whatever reason, God decided to tell the Jewish people, no. Jews have to make things complicated. That's what God basically comes from here. God says to the Jews, if life, wasn't complicated enough for you, I want you to merge these two calendars and somehow work with both of them. Thank you very much. Great, right? That's where we're dealt with. And the root of that is right here, right? So in this verse, right here, if you look close, there's actually 2 different directives. And the verse is divided into 2, telling us 2 different things. The first thing the verse says is, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. This new moon will be for you, Rosh Chodeshim, the beginning of the month. So God is indicating, I want you to adopt a lunar calendar. There's a big debate in the commentaries whether the Jewish people, until this point, had lunar calendar or solar calendar. But assume we had a solar calendar until then. That's the world used. It's much easier to track the seasons we feel, like to track measuring the moon and stuff, like figuring out what time of month it is. So this is sort of an innovation to change the calendar to be a lunar calendar, right? That's clear. This new moon, God, and the Midrash says, God kind of pointed to the moon. You see this? This is going to be an indication of a new month on the new Jewish cycle of time. That's mitzvah A. That's part one. Part two is this month must be for you the beginning of the months. It must be for you the first of the month of the year. So part one is this is a month. Part two is this month we're actually beginning right now is going to be the beginning of your calendar, the first of the months. Okay? Which leads to the next very confusing thing in the Jewish calendar. Our new year is in the 7th month. Go figure. Nisan's the first month, and actually throughout Torah, there's no names of months. There's the first month, second month, all the holidays in the 7th month and the 8th month. And the new year, Rosh Hashanah, celebrated at the beginning of the 7th month. Strange. When is the year starting? And so we kind of have 2 cycles of a year. There's the month cycle, which begins here. It's almost like a tax year, right? Mm-hmm. There's a year for
or a school year.
Or a school year, yeah, exactly. There's a year for this and a year for that. But what's the Jewish New Year? Is beginning of Nisan a Jewish New Year? It's the first of the first month. The first of the first month is not a new year. It's the middle of the year. Right? We're literally counting time on 2 different schedules. So here's a little way I understand it to explain all of this. I think, and it puts a lot of pieces together in this whole parsha here. God kind of operates in the world on 2 different dimensions. You can call it the natural and the supernatural. There's the world, and then there's sort of like the divine operation within the world. And they're both real, right? The world, science, nature is very real. To discount it and say, well, the whole scientific method is non-religious, has no basis. No, right? We're observing the universe God created. It's marvelous, right? This is God's creation. And it's very much the routine and the precision is incredible. And that's kind of from day one as God created the world, that's been the operation of the universe, right? But then we have a particular within the universal, the Jewish people. And at this moment, God's choosing the Jews to be, everyone in the world has responsibility to the universe, right? The 7 Noahide laws, that's for everyone. There's a certain responsibility every human being has as part of whatever we're trying to do, this project called creation, called universe. Everyone has a role. Every human being created in divine image, coming from Adam and Eve. Every human being plays a purpose in this grand master plan. But then there's God granted unique purpose within that to the Jewish people. They're becoming God's nation, my ambassadors, my people within this universe with a particular mission. And that's going to be expressed through the mitzvahs. This mission is not just to enhance the natural universe, to maintain order, but to introduce something into the world that wasn't there before. Divine operation. I want you to bring godliness into the world. Bring divinity, bring divine consciousness, something else we're uncovering within the world that's beyond the natural order. That's the Jewish mission, right?
It's the mission of shrooms.
Perhaps that could help. But it's a Jewish mission. Sometimes we see the effect of our actions, right? We pray and study, we're sensing the world differently. Sometimes we do a mitzvah. I have no idea how this fit in. How me not mixing milk and meat is making it a little more divine, I don't know. But God commanded it as part of my divine mission. Right? And there could be esoteric reasons, and some people understand it or don't understand it, but essentially it's part of our unique, particular mission in this world as Jewish people. Right? We're trying to innovate within the world. Not just to maintain the world, to protect nature, protect the running of the world, that everything should be in order. We're trying to create a new reality, uncover something new, grow, innovate, to bring divine into this world. That's the Jewish mission. one should not come at the expense of the other, right? We don't want everyone to be Jewish. It's not our mission to go and proselytize and convert the world. It's almost like, think about a football team. The quarterback has a unique role, right? He's going to be the most important player in the game. He needs a good team. He needs a good running back. He needs a good linebacker. He needs a good whatever the part of my ignorance in the rest of the game. But he needs good receivers, right? Otherwise, all his talent, all the plays they make are worthless. But at the end of the day, the quarterback is the main guy. And if everyone wants to be a quarterback, the game wouldn't work, right? So we have a purpose as Jews, and it's not about better or worse. It may be a more fundamental mission, but equally as important, everyone do their role, right? So side by side, all of it needs to coexist. So now we can look at when what was created. There's kind of this solar calendar. One more. I want to detail here. Yeah, we got time. A huge difference between the solar calendar and lunar calendar. The sun is very steady. It rises every morning and sets every evening. It goes through the same cycle, right? The sun is there, it's a presence that's constant. Whereas the moon waxes and wanes, right? A month of the moon means a cycle of the moon getting bigger, a round circle in the middle of the month. And then as soon as you think you just keep growing, it starts to shrink until you don't see it anymore. So the moon is on a cycle of constantly reinventing itself. Obviously, the moon's always there, but the way we see the moon, our appreciation of the moon, is constantly changing and going through cycles. Which is why the Hebrew word for a year, which is a solar term, is shana. Shana means repetition. It means like something that just keeps repeating upon itself. Whereas the Hebrew word for a month, chodesh, comes from chadash, new, renewal. So the sun represents this kind of constant, stable existence, whereas the moon represents something which is fluctuating, which is renewing itself, going through cycles, constantly reinventing itself, going through real lows, but then coming back at high, reinventing, innovating, right? So when the world was created, creation, God says, I'm setting into motion a world which has its natural order. What's the sort of default way we're going to count time? The sun. It's our stable existence. It's the nature. It represents what we should be striving towards, creating stability, creating a world which is able to operate. And we've done an incredible job in the last thousands of years of innovating within science and medicine and industrial innovation. We've done really well at the sun, creating stability. We want to create, to live longer, to be more productive. This is our solar existence, to create this stability of the sun. Now, when the Jewish people are leaving Egypt, God wants to indicate to the Jewish people, I have a different mission for you. I don't want you just to be good citizens of the universe. Obviously, it's important to be a mensch. The Talmud says, Derech Eretz Kam LaTorah. The reason we have all these stories pre-Sinai to teach us to be a good person before you have Torah. You have to have the bedrock, the foundation of Derech Eretz, of being a good human being, a mensch, right? But I have something in store for you a little more than that. And that I'm indicating through you're going to be having a lunar calendar. Follow the moon. And the moon is something which is constantly changing. Moon is, on the one hand, just reflecting the sun's light. But on the other hand, it's constantly almost adding to its light and then going through changes. And God says, I want you, the Jewish people, to embody that element of the world, to bring something different into the world. It's going to be challenging. There's going to be lows and highs. And look at our history, right? You're going to have time where you're getting smaller and smaller, going through so much challenge where you think you disappear, but then you have to reinvent yourselves, re-innovate your Jewish people. But essentially, this cycle is going to represent what you are bringing to the world, something different, reflecting God onto the world, and that's innovating something new here. That's going to be your mission, which the lunar calendar represents. Which is why, before they even leave Egypt, God finds it really important to tell Moses, tell the Jewish people, I have something to do with the lunar calendar. This is going to be set a tone for what's to become of the Jewish people as they leave Egypt. We're changing the very fabric of the way you see the world. Time is the context, the lens with which we live reality. Right? Past, present, and future. Time is our very is the sort of container that we live our lives within. I think Aristotle once said that time is the best teacher and it kills all of its students. But time is the constant of our lives, right? So it was, will be, that's everything. And the way we look at time and count time affects kind of how we live our lives. A side point here, besides the whole lunar solar thing, there's I once read a comment from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs on the Haggadah. He said, what's the first stage? The Seder has 15 stages, 15 steps. The first one is Kaddish, Kiddush, make Kiddush. And he says these 15 steps are sort of a 15-step program towards liberation, towards filling in with liberation, freedom. Kiddush is the first one. What's Kiddush? Kiddush means you're sanctifying time. It says the difference between a slave and a free person is control over time. You can work 15 hours and be free, and a slave can be only made to work 3 hours. It's not how hard you work or how long you work. The question is the control. If I'm choosing to work 15 hours or being forced to work 3 hours. Right? So being in control of your time is the first step towards freedom. That I'm in control. And if you look at the pasuk, it says, "HaChodesh hazeh lachem." This moon, this new month, will be to you. It's yours. I'm giving over the control of time to you. You're not going to be slaves anymore. Not someone else dictating to you how to spend your time. You're going to be mastered over your own counting of time. And with giving the Jewish people a new calendar is like telling them, you now are not beholden to anyone else's definitions of time. You're sanctifying your own time. You're living in your own terms. You have a different calendar, a new calendar. Right? Another interesting interpretation of the word lachem to you is that the counting of time was given over to the Jewish people, which is a very unique thing. I'll tell you what I mean. We have a calendar that's very fixed, right? I can't decide what date it is today. It's the 28th of January. I don't choose that. And the month finishes, it's 30 days of January, it's gonna start February, right? And it's very set, right? Almost we have to fit into the calendar because calendar isn't moving for anybody. The Jewish calendar was different because it's reliant on the new moon. Instead of having a fixed calendar, literally there have to be witnesses coming to the court and saying, we saw the new moon. Means after the moon finishes the cycle, it's called the molad, the birth of the moon, which literally means the moon has started to emerge for the first time in its new cycle. If no one saw the moon, it wouldn't become Rosh Chodesh. Because every day, every month in the Jewish calendar is either 29 or 30 days, because it's to make the calendar equal. If no one saw the new moon on the 29th day, it'd be a 30-day month. You had to actually have witnesses to come and say, we saw the new moon. Which means you can never really plan things in advance. You don't know when Passover is going to be 2 months in advance. The next 2 months might be 29 days, and then Passover will be a day earlier. Might be 2 months or 30 days, Passover will be 2 days later. You can't send an invitation to your Passover Seder in advance. I'm not sure it might be on a Tuesday or Wednesday, we don't know yet. Until it comes the beginning of Nisan, I know in 2 weeks from now is Passover, right? They did have, very complex calculations of when to expect the moon. They have the astronomical calculations, and the courts had diagrams and charts and all these different mathematics, but they could not officially say it's a new month until witnesses came. And the court then said it is now Rosh Chodesh. To the point, even if witnesses came and if they had no time to announce it until they finished, it wasn't Rosh Chodesh. The courts had to officially announce Rosh Chodesh to make it that way. It was almost in the human hands in the hands of the Jews to create this calendar. So that's what God is telling them, "HaChodesh hazeh lachem." This month is in your hands. And that is the incredible idea of freedom. Even God was telling the Jews, I'm not pushing time on you. You're going to be my partner in creating this calendar. It's in your hands wholly to make the holidays. Which means there's a divine commandment to eat matzah on the 14th of Nisan. It's from God. But who chooses which day is the 14th of Nisan? The courts, the Jews, the people, right? We're the ones that are making that decision, or not arbitrarily, but we are the ones who are creating that reality. So we actually aren't only receiving reality, we are co-creators of this calendar, of this reality, which is an incredible empowerment of these slaves, right? People who've been slaves for hundreds of years, telling them now, not only am I giving you a new way of calculating time that's uniquely yours, you now have people that stands apart and no one has control of you. I'm actually giving it in your hands. I'm trusting you that you are going to be the masters of time. That's an incredible, sort of liberating commandment to the Jews, right? So to go back, so the Jews now receive this new template for time, the lunar calendar. And God says this particularly lunar calendar is how you're going to identify, because you are going to be lunar people innovating in the world. But with a caveat, there's a catch. There's going to be a solar alignment as well. And this is, I think, goes to the heart of the what's what I'm looking for? Let's get it right now. This is the heart of the tension of Judaism, right? The paradox that we want to be separate but yet part of, right? On the one hand, we're trying to be more than just of the world. We have our own spiritual mission and purpose, connecting with God, living above the noise of the universe. We're not just chasing whatever else is chasing and going after money and pleasure and indulgence. On the other hand, we're not either looking for sort of pure spirituality. We're not trying to be ascetics and escape and saying, this is all false. This is all a world filled with lies, and I don't want to be part of it. And in an ideal world, I would be stationed on a mountaintop just praying and doing mitzvahs all day. That is absolutely against the ethos of Judaism. And the biggest proof is you cannot do most of the mitzvahs on a mountaintop, right? Try give charity on a mountaintop. Try be honest in business on a mountaintop. Try even rest from work when you're not working. The same pastor tells us rest on the seventh day, says, you shall work 6 days and rest seventh day. So the heart of Judaism is this paradox, this tension between being something more, bringing a spiritual identity into the world, and faith, but also assimilating it within the order of the world, being a part of the world. So not of the world, but yet in the world. This is a paradox which is very difficult to pull that line. And often you find yourself, leaning one way or the other way, getting too sunken into materialism, too assimilated into the culture, or being so removed from it you can't have an impact on it. You're not part of it to have any voice in the conversation. You're not changing the world because you're not part of the world. So the Jewish mission and what all of Judaism is really striving towards is marrying these two ideas of the divine, the spiritual purpose with the material order of the universe, and not to lose any of them in this combination. A big challenge, right? And if it was easy, we'd all be doing it, right? So it's a big challenge, and this is God sort of setting out for the Jewish people this directive in life. The way God gave the calendar, though, gives a little bit of perspective on how we can do this. Which is the primary? That's always a big question, right? The classic question, are you a Jewish American or American Jew? I still don't understand what it means. I know what it means, but it can be a silly way of saying something, right? But really the question is, what's the primary identity and what's the secondary identity? Where am I rooted and where am I coming towards? So if your primary identity is of the world, and I'm also trying to achieve some spirituality, then it's very easy to get stuck in the world and almost adapt your spirituality to the norms of the universe, which means basically you're reconfiguring what the Jewish message is to whatever the popular message of the day is, right? So you're rooted in the solar and you're trying to connect with the lunar as well, right? But the way God gives a calendar is the opposite. Essentially, what's your calendar to Jewish people? You are a lunar calendar. You're meant to be moons. I want you to be constantly innovating, waxing and waning. It's a challenge because you're always going to be struggling with the world because you're countercultural. You don't belong here. You're always going to go through that tension, time where you're the Jews on top of the universe, and time where we feel at the bottom of the barrel. We're being attacked and we're getting hate for no reason and disrespected and almost as popular to step on us. And we have this cycle. That's the package is going to be when we have a mission which is slightly different to the world. We're always going to be hated because we're different and we have a calling which people don't want to accept always. But our primary identity is this lunar identity, is this spiritual, innovative identity. But always making sure to align ourselves with the solar calendar, which means don't get lost in this. Make sure you always anchor it in real world reality. Right? So that is such an incredible, perspective of what it means to be a Jew. And that's why God wants to tell us to Moses, the Jewish people, before they even embark on freedom, before they even eat the Paschal lamb and have the matzah and leave Egypt, let me tell you what you're getting yourself into. Right? Some people will ask, that really freedom? You're going from one master, Pharaoh, to another master, God, who's giving you all these mitzvahs and directives, right? But essentially, it's the greatest freedom because freedom means I'm able to live out my own truth, right? We feel stuck when I'm not being myself. I'm being forced into being someone. Maybe it's my job is forced to do things. People feel stuck in a relationship because I can't be myself, I can't be fully expressed, not understood. So freedom means we are absolutely in sync with our true selves. That's essentially what God was doing here. You, the Jewish people, this is your nature, this is your calling, this is your soul. So by giving them this calendar, he wasn't limiting them in another form of slavery. He was guiding them towards something which was expressive of their truest nature, of their soul. You have lunar souls. That's who you are in a solar body, right? And so I'm giving you this lunar calendar with a solar correction or anchoring. And that is the Jewish story, which is why the world was created in Tishrei, the new year, Rosh Hashanah, the creation of the universe. That's what we're celebrating. It's a universal holiday, even though it's a Jewish holiday, but technically we are celebrating the creation of the universe. When we say in the prayers of Rosh Hashanah, all creations should recognize God, all human beings, we speak of the universal. But when the Jews leaving Egypt, God told them, for you, I'm also adding on the backdrop of this solar universe, on the foundation of a year starting in Tishrei of creation of natural order, I'm adding a layer of months, of lunar existence, of unique Jewish time, which begins when you leave Egypt. Nisan becomes the first month because the Jewish time traces itself back to leaving Egypt. And so the new year for the world is Tishrei. The new year for sort of our Jewish unique nation, the birth of the Jewish people, Nisan's the first month. And they both have to coexist. We don't lose Rosh Hashanah because Nisan started. No, it still becomes sort of the container, the anchoring of, on top of that, we have our Nisan model of lunar existence. Which is why in Torah there's no names of the months. The months are the first month, second month, third month, because each month is meant to always be reminded of, you ask on the fourth month. Fourth month to what? To leaving Egypt. Because when I hear month, when I count time, I'm supposed to be always reminded time in the Jewish sense of it, counting the lunar calendar, is traced itself back to the biggest miracle in time, leaving Egypt. So it's a miracle. A miracle is an aberration of the natural order. Because that's kind of a miracle is a lunar idea. We're innovating, changing reality, right? The plagues, splitting the sea. These are lunar things. They think the world's changing, then it goes back to how it was. It's unpredictable. And so we start from the first miracle from Egypt. That's how we count time. At the same time, we count years from Rosh Hashanah, from the new year, from Tishrei. Interesting historical little tidbit is the names of the months we have now in the Jewish calendar, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, are actually the Jews picked up when they were exiled from Israel between the two temples in Babylonia. These are Babylonian names of the months. And the Jews picked them up in that 70 years they had between the temples. And they came back to Israel with the return of Ezra, Nehemiah, and they adopted these names.
But sorry, Menashe, were they using the lunar calendar as well then, the Babylonians? Or they took the solar month names?
I think it must have been the lunar, either they were using a lunar calendar or had also a lunar calendar part of it and had these names. Yeah. Good question. I think there must have been a lunar calendar too. I have to look it up. But the question I've always been bothered by, and just this, preparing for this class, I read something interesting. The Torah uses names, first month, second month, and the Jews always use those names. Throughout the whole, the prophets use those names. Why did the Jews come back? Were they so assimilated that they totally disregarded and took on new names for the months? These aren't arbitrary translations, right? This is a whole new, like, losing the Jewish flavor of the months and adopting a Babylonian for how we count time. This is a Jewish calendar, and here we are borrowing names of months from a different culture. It seems very strange. But I read a commentary today, fascinating. It says, why do we have the names of the month by the numbers? To trace back to our origins, Egypt. And so the second month, third month, always remembering where it starts from, right? When the Jews returned to rebuild the temple, it was a new birth of the Jewish people. Where now they thought, when the temple was destroyed, it's the end. 10 tribes had been lost, and we were exiled from Israel. And the fact they were able to come back and rebuild is always for them a new beginning. And to mark that, they said, just like when we left Egypt, we used months to remember where it began. We wanted to take names of the months to remember where it began. When we left Bavel and came here, and sort of this almost a new exodus for the Jewish people, and to always remember where we're coming from, they took the Babylonian names of the months with them. So I thought it was a very interesting insight. The idea, almost like the lunar idea, or recreating, innovating, to take a new rebirth of Jewish people from there. And the truth is, this is the story of the Jews. Every crisis, every time the Jewish people faced devastation, we kind of bounce back with new innovation, right? Obviously, leaving Egypt, we got the Torah from Sinai. Temple was destroyed. We have suddenly the Mishnah and the Talmud and the incredible wealth of Jewish literature. So every sort of stage where the moon cycle is, waned to the point where it's barely existent, there's a rebirth, and something grows out of that, out of the tragedy, out of the crisis. Innovation grows, obviously within the framework of Judaism, but there's something, a new energy that is brought to the world, which reinvigorates Judaism. So this is, you can trace that back throughout Jewish history, that cycle of the moon. So this sort of explains both parts of this verse. Rosh Chodesh, the new month, Nisan to be the first of the year. Why is it so important right here? Because this is really the whole Jewish story encapsulated in viewing the moon, right? The whole of Jewish history and Jewish philosophy and Jewish life is written into this calendar shift from the solar cycle to a lunar cycle influenced by the solar cycle. And it's all there. And that's why the Jews are having it right before they leave Egypt. This is like the introduction to Judaism. Judaism 101 for the Jews. I'm not sure if they understood it then, what this is about, but it's all packed in there. And what that means for us today, I think, is two things. Number one is knowing our place in the world, right? What does it mean to be a Jew in a modern world? It's a very challenging thing. And especially, I think, in the last year and a half, where a lot of the norms have been challenged, shattered, our own self-perception in our surrounding has been challenged. And the question we have to ask ourselves and share with others, what does it mean today to be a Jew? What's that? Why? Why are we different? Why should I be different? Why are we called out differently? And it's important to understand our mission here, our place, our role in the world. And this gives perspective. We're here for a reason. And that reason is also the reason why we may not be always liked. But we have a mission to bring God into the world, to spread a divine consciousness, to bring this, something that is a natural part of the order of the world, to bring awareness of it into the world. That's our lunar role, but also not to do that to escape, right? People say today, well, if there's going to be anti-Semitism in college, don't send the kids to college, right? Or let's not be part of any of this world anymore, basically escape. All move to Israel and get out of here. I mean, God willing, Mashiach will come, we will move to Israel. But escaping from the world, then basically we'll have no say in the world anymore. We can never be an influence, a light to the nations, if we're not part of the fabric of the world. If we're not working in the same workplaces, if we're not going through the same, living in the same environment, how can we be influenced? So obviously we have to have a strong Jewish identity, know who we are, know that I'm an ambassador of God here. I'm this lunar existence. I'm here to bring something to the world, the consciousness that it doesn't have, but also to do it in a framework that I'm influencing the world, that I am part of something. People can look at me and say, you're a mensch. No, you're different. You're different. I can't listen to you. You're like weird. No, you're a human being, just like me. You're doing the same things I'm doing. You're working the same job that I'm working, but I see something different about you. And that's impactful, right? That's the way Kiddush Hashem. That's the way you inspire other people, because they see you're a Jew, having faith, having religion, but you're also part of the fabric of the world. That's how we change the world. That's number one. Number two, I think it's perspective of Jewish history. And it feels very dark sometimes. And even if not just the present, but sort of the trajectory to the future looks maybe bleak to some people, and sometimes, where are we headed and what's next? And how do we recover from this? But it's a cycle. The moon, as unpredictable as it is, the only thing predictable about it is that it's going to continue to be unpredictable. It's going to go smaller and then bigger. It's going to go through these cycles. And so knowing that it's not the end of the road, and when the moon reaches its smallest point, that's the moment of rebirth and regrowth. And that's the Jewish story. And so I don't think we're at darkest moments, and I hope we don't have to get darkest moments. But whatever darkness we do experience and whatever sort of crisis we do feel, it's a breeding ground for innovation, for growth, something spectacular. Not that it undoes any of the pain and the suffering and the tragedy, but it does allow us to bring something unique to the world right now. This is a moment for Jews to stand up, to be proud of who we are, and to share something with the world that maybe we didn't have access to beforehand. And this is our moment of rebirth of the moon, to bring our light shining onto the world. And in fact, the reason we don't see the moon for that moment, right, the cycle of the moon, when you don't see the moon is because it's entirely aligned with the sun, right? And therefore there's no reflection. It's in the same line of the sun. So in a certain sense, the moment where it's darkest is where the moon actually is most in line with the sun. So that, God willing, very soon we're going to see that rebirth, that growth that comes from crisis, that comes from tragedy, and just be good things for the Jews. So we'll be in the bounce back. It's pretty good right now, thank God. To be honest, as far as in the bigger picture of history, we shouldn't be bleak. We're as bad as it looks, it's very good, but God willing to be even better, and a light will shine, and like the moon at nighttime, we'll light the world, appreciate our light, and that's the way we will make the world a better place. And eventually, that's the messianic vision where the sun and the moon coexist, where our light will be able to be constant. The moon will no longer wax and wane. The moon's light will be as bright as the sun, where there'll be this it won't anymore be a struggle, be a tension between the two things, but they'll be entirely in sync with each other, and that will be sort of the natural order will be the supernatural. That's what we're looking forward to, and what our efforts are bringing towards, God willing. Any questions, comments?
Yeah, can you figure out exactly the day that it says, like this Rosh Chodesh, this chapter 12? Can you figure that exact day out with just the Torah itself, or do you need more?
Meaning what? They mean historically?
Oh no, because basically someone was talking about, someone said to him, like, don't focus on the Mishnah at all, focus more on the Torah. But then someone, Rabbi Shapiro from the Manhattan Torah Center, said, no, you can't, because you need the Mishnah to know exactly when, like, this was,
Yeah, essentially it doesn't say any indication of when it is. It says this month will be the first month. What's the first month? When is this? So we have to go for somewhere else. The idea that it's yes, so there's a lot of context, and some of that context is in other references in Torah, and a lot of it is from the rabbinic interpretation, which the Midrash, the Talmud, the Mishnah, which does. The Talmud is the story of someone who went to learn Judaism, and he came to the rabbi told him certain things, then he added things to the rabbi. He said, I don't want the rabbis, I don't want the Torah. So he says, the Torah I gave you, the vowels I read it with, is also for me, the rabbis. If you trusted me how to read that with these vowels, you can read it differently. No vowels in Torah text. Trust me, this also. It means, by definition, the Torah text needs an interpretation to come along with it. Otherwise, it's lacking context and meaning. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a similar question, which is, so it says there's a first month, and obviously talks about 7 month at some point. Where does it say that there's 12 months, and where does it say, oh, by the way, like you should add a month every so often?
Good question. There's actually no indication of adding a month. We know it from the idea that it's supposed to be months, 12 months of the year, and there has to also be the holidays be in the seasons. So therefore, we sort of understand it has to be added a month. I don't think there's any reference in Torah itself to a leap year and adding a month. It was probably passed to Moses. It wasn't innovated by the rabbis, but it was understood, and the indication in the text itself is we have to align the two calendars. The only way to do that is to add a month.
Fair enough.
So if like we didn't add a month every, like you said, like 7?
There are 7 leap years. Yeah, 7 leap years in 19 year cycle. Every 2 or 3 years.
Oh, okay. So if we didn't have that, would Shabbos land on like a Tuesday or something?
No, the Shabbos isn't going by the month, it's the weekdays. That's always remained the same. Right? 7 days in the cycle keeps repeating itself. It's the holidays, the Yom Tov, that goes by dates of the month. That would be changing. Shabbos would be a constant. It's 6 days a week, Shabbos, 6 days a week, Shabbos, no matter what. Question is Pesach, which is the 14th of Nisan, going to be a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, or a Shabbos? That depends on how we calculate the months. Is that going to be in the spring, in the fall, the winter? That's going to be how we do the months. But the days of the week remain the same.
Okay.
This is why I did not study mathematics in college.
Yeah, I guess a little comment. I'm sorry if I went a little dove in a little deep there today.
Very good.
Okay.